I welcome you to this 4-credit optional course titled Women's History in India from 18th century to 20th century. I am Professor Rekha Pande, teaching in the Department of History in the University of Hyderabad. I have 38 years of teaching experience. I have taught at University of Allahabad. I also did an optional course at International Institute of Information Technology called the Cultural and Religious Heritage of India. While doing these courses, I have realized that history only talks about men, their activities. The whole concept of history is only talking about what is happening in the public domain, and we think the private domain is not at all important. And therefore, in this course, we would focus on women's history. We strongly believe that women constitute a social group rather than a biological group, and gender like class, caste in India played a very major role in the past. The objectives of our course are to provide an opportunity to students to acquire an understanding of the status of women through the historical period from 18th century to the contemporary period. It would also focus on the changing character of gender ideologies and gender relations in India under the colonial rule. Such a study, we hope, would enable an understanding of the changes and continuities in the lives of women. The course would use gender as a lens to examine the past and examine how this impacted women. This course is divided into 6 modules. The unit 1 is pre-colonial India. In the second unit, we look at reforms and women in 19th century. The third unit would look at the national movement and women. Unit 4 would focus on institution and structures related to women, and Unit 5 would focus on women in post-independence period, and the last unit would look at globalization and women. The aim of this course is not just to tack on to the existing framework and add women to it, but it would help towards a better understanding of the past. We would understand the evolution of an ideology, social relations, and institutions that led to the subordination of women. The starting point of our course on women's history is what is historically significant is that women constitute a social group as opposed to a biological group. In the first unit on pre-colonial India, we would look at first an introduction to this whole course. Then we would also start by talking on what is women's history, why we need it, and how do we reconstruct women's history. We would also focus on writings of women, and then we would look at women in pre-modern India. This would give us a background to this course, and then we would look at Eurasian women and Anglo-Indian women. The unit 2 of this course would focus on reform and women in 19th century, where we would look at the whole 19th century reform and how women's question became very important at that time. We would also look at education for women, women's organization, how women struggled for their rights. We would focus on important women like Savitribai Phule, Pandita Ramabai, Ramabai Ranade, Anandibai, and Sarla Devi. The third unit would focus on the national movement and women, where we would look at the role women played in the national movement. We would also focus on the extremist movement and women. We would also talk about Gandhi, Ambedkar, and Nehru, and what were their views on women's role. We would also focus on certain important women during this period like Sarojini Naidu, Durgabai Deshmukh, Ruqayya Sukhawat Hussain, and Kamla Devi Chattopadhyay. We would also learn about Subhash Chandra Bose and the Rani Jhansi regiment, and then we would also talk about partition and the violence which affected women. The fourth unit would focus on institution and structures related to women, where we would look at the various debates that took place at this time on sati and women. We would also look at Devdasis and the anti-Nach movement. We would look at the upper cloth movement which happened in South India. We would focus on courtesans and women's journals. The fifth unit would look at women in post-independent period, where we would look at women's history in contemporary India. We would also look at certain environment movements like Chipko movement and Narmada movement. We would also focus on the anti-Arak movement which took place in South India. The sixth unit would focus on the new trends which have come in, that is globalization and what impact it has had on women. We would focus on India and the impact, how did globalization begin. We would also look at women's work in the organized, unorganized sector. We would focus on violence against women and issues like trafficking of women. We would also focus on women and information technology, and we would end this course with a summary and conclude this course. We hope by doing this course from modern times to contemporary times, the students will be able to explore the lived experiences and how women were, the construction of women that continues to shape our view today. The students will also learn to appreciate the various experiences which women had across different time zones and culture. The students will also learn to analyze historical and contemporary systems of privilege and oppression with special attention to the ways gender interacts with race, class, sexuality, ethnicity, ability, religion, nationality, and globalization. We hope that once this course is completed, the student would demonstrate a knowledge of the historical context that was important for the making of women of today. They would also understand the distinction between primary and secondary sources and learn to look at them in a critical way. They would also understand the diversity which is very important in our culture and how women negotiated through different issues like race, gender, class, ethnicity. And it would also help them to understand women's experiences and looking at family, which has really not been looked upon in any kind of traditional history. Thank you very much.